A not-for-profit applied pharmaceutical innovation partnered with the University of Alberta is working on building the Canadian capacity of drug manufacturing capabilities. API's CEO Andrew MacIsaac joins us on Canada Now. And Andrew, this has been such a focus for Canadians because of the pandemic. Have you felt the spotlight over the last few months?
Oh, absolutely. And in more ways than one. There's been a lot of work happening in the life sciences sector here in Canada, over decades. But I think right now it's finally coming to front and center in front of the Canadian audience because we now see the value of having drugs and the impact they can have in our lives.
Well, I want to find out more about your team. Who do you have in your network as far as scientists and clinicians, what have you?
Sure. So we're a not-for-profit institute that was based out of the Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences at the University of Alberta. And we spun out into an independent institute. And so what we have at our fingertips is a network that spans across academia with over 10 different institutes, as well as about 100 experts in their field within the drug development sector. We have an in-house team of about 30 folks who range in backgrounds from, the former heads of manufacturing in pharma, as well as, trainees and postdocs and folks who can design clinical trials, do the work that is required to manufacture and synthesize synthetic chemicals that you use to put into drugs, as well as figure out how to best approach novel drug development when it comes to screening these chemicals to find out if they have a specific effect in a biological system like an animal and then eventually a human.
Well, so like the elevator pitch, API helps innovators launch their ideas into the world. You look to accelerate the drug development process.
Yes, absolutely. So to put it into a little bit of a metaphor, drug development is a really complex process that requires a whole bunch of different areas of expertise. And it's good to think about it like building an office tower. So, the initial scientist who comes up with a discovery is sort of like an architect. They can come up with an idea of what it would look like. They can do renderings. They can get people excited about it. But they're not a structural engineer. They're not a mechanical engineer. They're not a land developer. They're not a carpenter. They're not any of these other fields that are required to make that building a reality. It's the exact same in drug development. You can have someone who comes up with something that might be a potential cure for cancer, but they need dozens and dozens of different fields of expertise to help that discovery move along. And so right now, in Canada, we tend to think of, the initial innovator or the person who made the discovery as the person who has all those technical skills to move things forward, when it couldn't be further from the truth. And so what API does is we build out and provide that capacity to those innovators in a way that trains and builds out the teams that can work for their projects and enable them to eventually become successful and be able to become successful here in Canada versus outsourcing a lot of their work overseas, which is something that has tended to happen quite a bit for Canadian innovation. We're one of the worst countries for putting our IP on the market based out of Canada. We're good at making IP, but we send it to the States or Europe or elsewhere before it finally ends up becoming something that's useful.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I love how you're doing all of this and in training graduate students and interns. How much has API helped build the economy in Alberta?
Absolutely. So since we launched, we have attracted over $30 million of projects that wouldn't have otherwise come to the province. We've also been incubating a number of different companies that now have actually received about $370 million in market capitalization. It's hard to track some of the values of pharma companies unless they're public, but the public ones we have are now valued at that. And I'd say that that's a pretty good indicator of the potential around the work that we're doing. The companies we're creating are potentially billion-dollar companies as they move forward. and we've worked to attract companies that wouldn't have originally come to Alberta, wouldn't have originally come to Canada to grow and develop here. So it's a potential for a huge part of diversification within Alberta. That's one of the areas where the province can play a strong role. There's pharmaceutical industry in Ontario and Quebec, but they still miss some of these more technical manufacturing type capabilities, and we're hoping to provide this to Canada as a whole to enable the success of our industry.
Well, I want to ask about a couple of things involving API. First off, tell us about your recent partnership with Midicine.
Absolutely. So Midicine is a U.S. company that is focused on psychedelic therapeutics. So we were approached by them about a year ago as they were looking to develop products for clinical trials. We have the expertise and the capacity for them to do that. So they entered into a contract with us where we've recruited and built out a team for them of about 15 folks here in Alberta, manufacturing and preparing their compounds for clinical trials around the world. So, there's going to be drugs that came out of here in Alberta used, in Johns Hopkins in the States, in Europe, at Imperial College, at sites, around the globe, really. And I think it's a very strong testament to the capabilities that we have here in Canada and Alberta that we're able to do this, and we're, being selected by companies who, could go to any country in the world to get this done, but they're getting it done here.
Well, from Midicine to voclosporin, tell us about that.
So voclosporin is a really interesting story, and it's an example of the type of work that we want to support and continue to grow. So voclosporin is a drug that was discovered at U of A about 25 years ago, and it is something that is being used for lupus nephritis, and it took about 20 years to get on the market, but the moment it did, the company became a multi-billion-dollar company. So Rinia Pharmaceuticals, the company that owns that drug now, is based out of Victoria and is now one of only 10 Canadian companies to have put a drug on the market in the U.S. And that's no small feat. In the history of the FDA, they've only really approved about 2,000 novel medications. And so having some Canadian names and companies among that list is actually quite a feat. And so really what our goal is to help try and ensure that more of those success stories come. And so for the voclosporin story, we helped with some aspects of PK work with them. Some of our staff actually used to be employees of Arinia's predecessor company, Isotechnica. And we've got other companies such as Hepion Pharmaceuticals that's now based in Edmonton, previously had their R&D happening in the U.S. that are now sort of moving back to the region and beginning to begin their development work. And so it's a tremendous sign of the potential that we have here in Canada to develop drugs that will, eventually hit the global market. And for Alberta, it's especially critical as a diversification tactic, because if you're looking at industries that can provide additional economic growth the same way that the oil and gas industry did, you don't need to look much further than pharmaceuticals. They've got large multinational companies making significant capital investments. You've got, a healthy network of small and medium-sized enterprises doing novel drug development work, and you get everything from blue-collar to white-collar jobs, from logistics to research scientists.
Well, and that's so good to hear. I mean, on the Alberta front, of course, but beyond on the Canadian front, because I think some Canadians are disheartened with the speed with which Americans are getting vaccinated. versus the rate that Canadians are being vaccinated right now. And obviously the difference is what's being concocted in-house in the U.S. versus what's happening in Canada. But it's nice to shine a light, and I'm glad we've had you on, Andrew, because then we could hear more from the inside on what is actually going on within the industry here in Canada. And look, you are also the Assistant Dean for the Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. How confident should Canadians feel in seeing a COVID vaccine made in Canada?
I think that really depends on government. So over the past 30 years, drug development and manufacturing on the larger sort of big pharma scale slowly left Canada to other jurisdictions. And right now, we have an opportunity to really change that paradigm and bring back a lot of that industry that previously left. There's a couple of really good sort of pieces in front of government right now that they need to fund in order for things to be successful. For ourselves, we've since the early phases of the pandemic been really suggesting that what the government needs to do is provide the capital for large-scale manufacturing, both of vaccines as well as chemical drugs, and the sterile fill finish that's required to enable them to be put into a vial that you can inject into someone's arm. Not very many people realize, but if you think about it, it's quite true that, manufacturing a vaccine is one thing in terms of the actual, the substance, but you also have to figure out how to put it into a bottle without exposing it to any sort of bacteria or pathogens that can cause an issue if it's injected into someone. And so it's critical that we build out this capacity here because that's a key step of the manufacturing process. And I don't think that, very many people understand, the complexities of some of these aspects. So we're working really hard with a whole group of different companies from Providence Therapeutics to Antos Pharmaceuticals to partners like Sandoz Canada to help build out this capacity so that it's able to be used by Canadian companies that are pursuing that vaccine projects, as well as in the future, for future pandemics, when the call goes out, where can we manufacture this? Canada can start putting up its hand, and as a result, 6 or 8 months later, when vaccines start to move forward into the patients, we're, at the forefront of where they're being produced.
Which is where we'd like to be. Absolutely. Check out appliedpharma.ca. Applied Pharmaceutical Innovation CEO, Andrew MacIsaac. Andrew, I can't thank you enough for joining us. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.